Alternative experimental designs. It is not easy to devise an experiment that is both well-controlled and enlightening. Control of every possible confound is rarely achievable. Moreover, because psychological experiments typically use living beings, ethical and practical considerations limit the kinds of manipulations one can do. Thus, clinical researchers must often settle for experimental designs that are less than ideal. The most common such variations are the quasi-experimental design, the natural experiment, the analog experiment, and the single-subject experiment. Research pitfalls. Good research helps answer important questions and advance knowledge in a field. It is objective, carefully planned, clearly described, and aware of its own limitations. A good study features well-defined questions, background information, opposing viewpoints, clear data and analyses, both supportive and unsupportive findings, cautious conclusions, and alternative interpretations. Littman, 2012. Good researchers avoid behind-the-scene problems. Factors that can doom a research study include low validity, confounds, inadequate controls, and poor sampling. Other behind-the-scene factors can also limit the success and credibility of research. Lack of respect. Ad hominem, argument criticizing people instead of criticizing arguments. Exclusion problem, prematurely discounting competing views. Hypocrisy, holding others to a higher methodological standard than oneself. Flawed styles of interpretation. Confirmation bias, seeing supportive data as confirmations of a hypothesis while viewing unsupportive data as exceptions. Post hoc hypothesis, formulating additional hypotheses after data collection. Hypotheses that were not in play before the data was collected. Contradiction blindness, failing to take contradictions seriously. Sharing is important. The American Psychological Association requires authors of articles accepted for journal publication to share their data with peers for reanalysis or replication. However, one study found that almost 75% of such authors refused requests for their data. Over-accentuating the positive. Scientific journals are more likely to publish positive studies that support the tested hypothesis than negative, unsupportive studies. The proportion of published studies that are positive has increased steadily over the years. Potential conflict of interest. It is important that researchers have no conflicts of interest as they conduct their work. But more than 2/3 of drug efficacy studies are conducted by private researchers who are paid directly by pharmaceutical companies. 80% of published pharmaceutical company studies report favorable outcomes. In contrast, only half of the published studies sponsored by non-pharmaceutical companies report favorable outcomes. Replication is important. Replication is the repetition of studies with different investigators, participants, and situations. Replicated studies help determine the accuracy and generalizability of the original studies. Unfortunately, today's replication undertakings are raising questions about some of psychology's research findings. Fewer and fewer replication studies are being conducted in psychology. Contradictory replicated studies are rarely published. Once an initial study's findings are accepted, contradictory replication findings rarely change public or scientific opinions.